the forest, letting me walk among its naked limbs, had me on my knees again, in silence, shouting, yes, yes, my holy friend, let your splendor devour me.
Well, this is Joe, Tim, and Malcolm, the School of Christian Mysticism, a week before beginning of Lent. 2023, and inviting you to share our walk amongst our naked limbs. Just,
Yeah.
well,
What you can't see because
because as ever
we're trying to be too artistic in this video. We should just do what we normally do.
which is just an unscripted nakedness into our musings, into our reflections, contemplations, as we contemplate entering Lent as a preparation for Easter. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about nakedness actually, because when we had that time of silence before we pressed record,
yeah,
which I was really grateful for. Thank you, Malcolm. It struck me quite, well, I was going to say forcibly, but quite sweetly, that Lent is about intimacy, is about, being naked, actually. I remember last year, Tim, you and I talked about Lent and fasting, and I remember you used the word stripping down, that fasting helps you to strip down. Because life clings to us, doesn't it? In the most amazing way. We sort of accumulate weight. And I was just thinking of, I was just getting in touch, really. And perhaps touch is a good word to use with intimacy. With becoming naked. On the naked knees in the naked forest. So I think that's an emerging opening for me right now.
We laughed quite a lot just then, and Lent can be a time of like taken just too seriously, can't it? Like, as we can take our faith or religion anyway too seriously, we can take ourselves and our lives too seriously. And Lent is an opportunity to, as you say, become naked again. The whole problem with Adam and Eve in the garden, well, maybe not the whole problem, but one of the big problems was that they suddenly were ashamed of their nakedness.
Mm.
They didn't want God to see them naked. And they hadn't, before they took that apple or whatever it was that they took, that knowledge they took, and they hadn't even considered that they were naked.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, good place to start.
Mm.
Yeah, that kind of innocent nakedness, egoless nakedness. For me, that's about the ego, and Lent is something about letting go of our personal ego. I've been thinking, because Lent traditionally is about giving something up. um, and I think, well, I've given up a lot of things already. I'm vegan. I'm vegan. I don't eat meat, fish, eggs, dairy. Don't drink alcohol except for the Eucharist. Um, and then I realised that I'm a bit proud of that, actually. I've been vegan for 30 years now. Before it was kind of trendy.
Mm.
Uh, it's that has become part of my ego. It's not giving up anything, actually. It's a kind of a little bit smug about it. It reminded me of a Buddhist monastery that I stayed in one time, and they're very strictly vegan, and the abbot there took all the monks out to McDonald's to have a beef burger.
Oh, really? Oh.
Because they'd got so attached and proud about being vegan.
Mm-hmm.
It had become a handicap
Mm.
instead of being liberating. They weren't innocently vegan.
Mm.
They were egotistically vegan.
Yes. Mm.
I think that's the case with me. I don't think I could bring myself to eat a beef burger.
Mm.
But there's something about that. And again, I read a monastic, Christian monastic, modern Christian monastic. I can't remember which one. He said that when he was in his youth, he used to be proud that he could drink people under the table. And then when he joined the monastery, he became proud that he could meditate people under the table.
Yes. Yes, I remember that. Yes.
I think it may be Thomas Keating who said that, was it?
Sorry?
Thomas Keating said something along those lines anyway, but he may have been quoting another.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about giving up something that we're attached to with our ego and turning away from that and towards God. Let your splendor devour me, as it says in the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Devour my ego, devour my attachment.
Mm.
And it kind of misses the point of it if you just say, "Oh, I'll give up chocolate," or Mm.
So how can we go into Lent? There's in Ash Wednesday, when we put the sign of the cross on the forehead with ash and oil, and then we go outside, we're kind of marking ourselves in public as having observed Ash Wednesday for a start, and as being Christian, I guess. Is there an egoic pitfall in that, do you think? Or is there a way that we can do these things without feeding our ego?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. Is it more egoic to wipe it off before one gets outside?
Yeah.
Or is it more egoic to walk around with it? I'm not sure. It's kind of like the sticking nature of the ego to what we're doing as to whether it's.
I guess what's happening there is this whole thing about when we are meditating, are we just going inside, or are we still aware of what's outside of us? And what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on the transformation that happens to us through contemplation, through our relationship with God? Is God's doing, not our doing? So perhaps when we focus on, okay, how am I gonna battle with my ego now? Something like this. That very notion itself it comes from ego. It's, well, who's battling with the ego? Well, it's me, of course. I'm fighting with this ego. I'm fighting with myself. And you could go into knots, couldn't you, with eating the burger, maintaining being a vegan. And then, so why am I eating the burger? So that my ego is, this is my fast, I'll eat the burger. But yeah, so we could just get stuck in it all, couldn't we? And then not really be drawn by Christ, by the Spirit of God, by the practice itself, into this 40 days, 40 nights in the wilderness, or however we want to characterize it. So I guess, what are we going to do then? Or not do?
So one thought I had was, well, there's, of course, we have worldly desires all the time. We're attracted to do something, or if not do it, to think about it in ways that are not necessarily healthy. And one thing that struck me is that each time that happens, rather than focusing on one thing and saying, I'll try and abolish that, I mean, it just doesn't work. It's the whack-a-mole thing, isn't it? When one desire pops up, you can knock it down, but another two pop up.
Yeah, like Medusa's.
You can't. You can't keep them. It's a path to nowhere, really. Trying to do it like that, and what's needed is a total sort of turning away from all that kind of thing and towards God. So one thing that occurs to me is, whether it's feasible, is that every time I become conscious of some desire of that kind, worldly desire, to turn that into a desire directed towards God. And in that way, every worldly desire becomes a blessing in effect,
Yes.
because it's making me pray, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. It's not very clearly formulated, and I'm hoping it'll get more clearly formulated through grace during Lent.
Mm.
I can't formulate it any more than that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes, I'm thinking of Teresa of Avila and the partridge. I may not remember this absolutely accurately, the detail, but she's the, as we know, the abbotess or abbot of a monastery, and one evening, I think, in the kitchen, she's one of the sisters comes in and is horrified to find her tearing into a partridge, a cold partridge that has been cooked, and stuffing it in her face, and the sister says, "How could you?" We're supposed to act with restraint and everything else, and she says, "When I eat partridge, I eat partridge. When I don't, I don't." Or I don't remember what the corollary is like, but when I eat partridge, I eat partridge. That's definitely there. And or when I fast, perhaps. And there is something about the going on from what you were saying, Malcolm, about that we're doing what we're doing with full presence. That's what we're trying to do all the time, isn't it? That we're fully present, whatever's happening, whatever we're doing. I think one of the the disasters of our modern Western world really is our lack of consciousness in our consumption, and where it's led us to pretty well extinction as a human race, and our ability to split off parts of our psyche. That I suppose fasting, the times when I fasted, I think what I literally with food, what it has revealed to me is my thinking process in relation to consumption, and the script that is running unconsciously all the time in relation to, for example, I mean, talking about giving up things, it's in the scale of things, it's a minor thing, but I'm aware that I'm very fond of sweet things, biscuits and cake and stuff, and it's really one of the joys of life. Have a nice slice of cake, but anyway, but I'm aware that there is a whole thinking linkage going on around what it means to have a biscuit. There's a comfort in it, and I think one should be comforted. I'm open to comforting, but to being comforted, but if it leaves me unconscious to what's going on in my life, which needs a conscious addressing or something, then I think that's a kind of it's I suppose the notion of fasting is addressing our addictions, I suppose, our addictive thinking, which keeps us unconscious. That's a thought anyway.
A lot of those things that we do, comfort eating, even going for a run can be the same. It's stupefaction so that we don't. It's a kind of defensive mechanism, isn't it? So that we don't focus on those things that are nudging our consciousness that need to be addressed. We don't necessarily think they do need to be addressed. We think in that state of stupefaction, we think the last thing is to address them. But yeah, I think absolutely, Joe. If we enter Lent in such a way that we become aware of attachments and stupefacations that we have, and the two seem to go hand in hand, really, then we are going to enter a time of pain, but it is an opportunity to wake up, to detach or disentangle ourselves from really what is holding us in a kind of death, death of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we are people of faith or no specific faith, but feel connected to the universe and practice contemplative prayer, meditation, yoga, all kinds of things, we're still prone to these things. And those very things that we can do, I guess this is the point we're all kind of making, can equally be called into action by the ego as a buffer, as a sleepy avoidance of reality, however we understand that word. Yeah. So how can we enter Lent then? How can we move into that period of 6 weeks? That it may be meaningful, or bring us to repentance, to turn away from those parts of us that are keeping us from God, turn back to God.
That are keeping us from intimacy.
Yeah.
From being naked, really.
Absolutely, yeah. If we take ourselves seriously, then maybe we need to just, maybe it's helpful to do something silly.
Like,
like
yes.
Run naked through the village, perhaps. It's the trouble is there are so many connotations to that, aren't there? You'll be arrested for a start, probably, depending on your village. But I don't know, I don't know. The trouble is, again, you do something silly and you're drawing attention to yourself, which is egoic. I don't know, it's not easy. It's not. How do you stop taking yourself seriously? So seriously.
suppose it's the ego thinks it's very special, doesn't it, and should be taken seriously. And I think laughing at aspects of that is a very healthy thing.
Yes.
Um, and there's a lot written, isn't there, about being a fool for God.
Yes.
And some of the saints who've done apparently crazy things, but Jacopone da Todi, who's one of my favorite Italian, not a saint, but a holy man, who went walking on all fours around his village square, neighing like a donkey.
Mm-hmm.
And he just felt moved to do that, to look ridiculous like an ass.
Yes. Yes.
He was a Franciscan. Francis called the body an ass, I think. And, um, that kind of thing. But it's about not drawing attention to oneself. I mean, that obviously it would have done, wouldn't it? but it's about not caring, not being, not that sort of thing doesn't matter. Our ego self doesn't matter. In fact, it's not even real in some kind of a way. It's all manufactured, artificial. There's only one reality, and that's God.
Mm.
And to turn away from what's not real is something to do with Lent, isn't it?
Yes.
Turning away from what's not the truth, not real, and turning instead towards the true self, God, the Christ that's in us. And remember being mindful of that instead of being mindful of ourselves all the time, our ego self. Or as Tim rightly points out, being stupefied. I mean, when I was younger, I used to run ridiculous distances. And that was a stupefaction thing. Because if you run for long enough, your mind just sort of goes, really. And you're just running like a robot. And that's a stupefaction. And we do, even meditation can be used as a form of stupefaction, and that's not what it should be for. It should be a turning towards God, and everything can remind us that God is the only truth. That the things we think are so important that relate to our ego self are just not important. In the greater scheme of things, only God is important. Only God is real for me. Yeah, not sure where that's going, but something like that.
But if only God is real, then that includes the ego, doesn't it? I mean, we can't exclude something.
So this is important, I think, what you're saying here, because there is a movement, like a trend, isn't there, in kind of spirituality and pseudo-spirituality and in popular culture, which seems to kind of blandly dismiss ego as being something that we shouldn't have, something that we need to lose, need to almost fight against. We started at the beginning talking about fighting our ego, but who's fighting the ego? It's the ego fighting the ego. But you have mentioned a few times, and I think it's important, that there is a time in our lives where we're actually building ego, or ego is being built, and it's not all unhealthy. But in fact, a healthy ego is something necessary for it. Could you just explain what you mean by that?
I'm just that the ego is it's just the position of the ego is that if the ego is the in charge, is the master, then we're in trouble. That's the ego, the addiction to the stories of the ego, the scripts, etc. But if the ego is the servant of the soul, then that's, as it were, appropriate and right positioning. But most of the time, the ego's in charge. Our ego, my ego. I think Neil Douglas Klotz has an idea, like there is that bit in Proverbs about wisdom inviting everyone to her table and spreading it with, as it is in the King James version, with meat and wine and so on, meaning food and wine, and as an internal process, he has this suggestion that one invites the aspects of self, so that all are included. And I must say, I must remember this myself. What I found very helpful is to remember that these aspects of ego, which are not helpful, are like they are young parts of myself, which, if I become aware of them rather than pushing them away, if I invite to come and sit with me or walk with me, so that I'm aware of them, I'm including them as a younger part of myself, and I can restrain aspects of my ego if I'm conscious of them like that. I can talk to them. And
when you say I can talk to them, who do you mean?
Well, I suppose I think a more aligned self, a wiser aspect of being.
Would you say that's the eternal self?
Well, it's my conscious self, a higher aspect of self. I don't think I would claim it to be that it's the eternal one, but it would align itself with the eternal better than the childlike aspects of ego.
For me, it's summed up by it's no longer me that lives, but Christ that lives in me.
Yes.
The ego becomes the Christ in the ideal.
Yes.
It's still there in that it's how we function in the world, but
exactly.
It becomes the Christ.
Yes.
And that must be the goal for me of being a Christian.
Yes.
Does that?
Yeah. Sorry, but we don't lose our personality, do we? You stay welcome.
But the personality becomes Christ.
Becomes Christed.
Christed, yes.
I guess you could talk about expressions of Christ. Christ expresses Christ's self in different ways through our personalities, perhaps. The word ego is borrowed from psychiatry, isn't it?
Yeah, although I think it was a concept before Freud even really, but yeah.
It's a Greek word. That's it. Was Freud, for example, speaking metaphorically? He must have been when he was speaking of ego, not, or did he think there is actually something that exists that is ego?
Oh yes, I think it was just fairly concrete about it. I
Is
think.
it? Oh, okay. So he would go as far as to say the word is the thing.
Yeah. Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
We've gone quite
Yes.
scientific now, I suppose.
Well, so I was just feeling like trying to pull out the threads before we finish. And I don't know whether I can do it accurate to our conversation, but I know we started with nakedness.
Yeah.
But from that led me to intimacy and not having barriers, I suppose, to Christ. We've we've laughed, we've talked about laughter. We've talked about have we talked about not being too serious?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, yes. We've talked about aspects of self as we were just now in relation to the ego, and I think we arrived at that. I just love that word, Christed. I just it's just somehow there's something about that word. You've used it in liturgies before now, Tim, and you used it, Malcolm, just now, or I did.
You did, yeah.
I did. Right, okay, it was congratulations.
Well done, Joe.
But Christing the ego, you were saying, Malcolm, that everything becomes Christ. So maybe Lent is this, is it? That to become more conscious of the Christing of the ego in us and how we might stand in the way of that.
And to truly desire that's the thing.
Yes. Yes.
We can say it, but do we truly desire that? Do we really want to lose our current worldly ego and have it let your splendor devour me, as the poem said? Do we want our ego to be devoured by the splendor of Christ?
I think that's it. Do we truly want that?
Maybe let's just go with have faith again. Happy Lent.
Thank you both.
Into the forest, into Lent. The forest. Letting me walk amongst its naked limbs. had me on my knees again, in silence, shouting, yes, yes, my holy friend. Let your splendor devour me.